What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys had a wonderful week out there. That is right. We are back here on the Investor Channel, where every Friday we bring you the FAANG Stock Recap Show, where we recap all the major news for all the FAANG stocks, plus Microsoft and Tesla, and we also go over them from a technical perspective as well. Now, in the link of the description below, we do have timestamps. I also would love to have you follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well. Links to that in the bio below as well. Now, before we kick things off with the news, we are on the eve of earnings. And so as you can imagine, the news starts to slow down a little bit as we get into earnings season. And we are just a week away or 2 weeks away in some cases with some of these companies. Now, the first to report will be Tesla on October 20th. After that, we've got Facebook on the 25th. And then we've got Google and Microsoft on the 26th. And then we have on the 28th, Apple and Amazon and NVIDIA on the 17th of November. So those will be dates that you want to keep in mind. And we'll talk about it from a technical perspective as well. As we move into earnings, people like to position themselves, and some people like to just be hands off the week or two leading into earnings. So we'll talk about that. If buyers and sellers, or especially like sellers, start to dry up, well, all of a sudden stocks can start melting up. And we've seen some evidence of that. We'll talk about that more when we get to the technical segment of the program. Kick things off like we always do with Facebook. Start of the week at $326, end of the week relatively flat, about $325 per share. Now, a second Facebook whistleblower is coming forward and wants to testify. This young lady was fired last fall from Facebook after 3 years of working there, and she feels it's, quote, her civic duty to testify in front of Congress. See what happens there. Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Grassley. Klobuchar is a Democrat from Minnesota. Grassley is a Republican from Iowa. Tell you what, guys, it wouldn't be the FAANG Stock Recap Show if we didn't have a bill working its way through Congress trying to regulate big tech. Now, this bill is slated to go. It looks like they're trying to push this forward. And since it is bipartisan, probably has a higher probability of actually moving its way through there. It looks to ban the platforms from giving preferential treatment to search results that benefit their own companies. This, to me, is a target at Amazon and Google. So when you search Amazon for batteries and Amazon's brand of battery shows up over Duracell and Energizer or whatever, and same with Google when their products show up over maybe like a Yahoo or you know, a Microsoft or something like that, well, it's viewed as anti-competitive. And Senator Amy Klobuchar said, this is a quote, when dominant tech companies exclude rivals and kills competition, it hurts small business and can increase cost for you. And you was capitalized. And last time I checked, I haven't paid a lot to search on Google. I haven't paid a lot to be on Facebook. Now, I'm an advertiser on these platforms. I spend a lot of money on ads, but me as a user don't have to pay a lot. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm sure there might be some lawsuits if that bill gets passed. Now, Facebook is launching live shopping events on November 1st. Talked about this a lot on the show. So where can Facebook expand to? Okay, I think they've got a lot of ways to expand. They got billions of users on its platform on a monthly basis. And so they can start expanding. And I think the clearest runway, the easiest target for them is shopping. And they've obviously integrated the marketplace on the app. There's lots more products and stuff like that happening on Facebook. Well, now they're doing these live shopping events. And this is popular. I think it's in China where you can get on Tmall or you can get on one of the sites. And it's almost like home shopping network. It's almost like a YouTube home shopping network where people and brands just get up there and they sell stuff all day long. It can be a new integration, not necessarily as popular here in the United States, but it could be. And they're also integrating something called like a drop. So like Nike releases a pair of Jordans, or maybe like Supreme, maybe a new hoodie or something like that. Well, those brands might not utilize it, but maybe other brands utilize it, and Facebook can be the destination to drop that merchandise, to register those customers, have them show interest, and those types of things. We'll see what happens there. Moving on to Apple, started the week at 143, end of the week about we'll call that 145 or so. Apple is set to cut their iPhone 13. This is the brand new phone that was released just weeks ago. They are going to cut that production target due to chip shortages. Again, we're seeing shortages all over the place, and there's a lot of arguments whether it's permanent or it's temporary. I think it's temporary. It's just how temporary will it be? Will it be another 6 months? Will it be another 12 months? Will it be another 24 months? We're not really sure on that, but they are cutting their iPhone 13 targets by as many as 10 million devices. We'll see in about 2 weeks how that impacts Apple's earnings. Now, Apple is announcing on October 18th, this is Monday. This is actually a big deal. I actually think this is bigger than the iPhone 13. The iPhone 13, good product, good phone. Is it any much different than the current iPhone or the previous generation, the iPhone 12? No, it's not. There's a couple of different things that are different, but it's not that big of a leap. What is going to be I'm talking about a gigantic leap are these new MacBook Pros that will be introduced on Monday. Again, this is all rumors, but it's pretty well known at this point that new MacBook Pros are coming in a 14 and 16-inch side, and it's going to have the next generation of Apple's M1 chip. They'll likely call it M1X or potentially maybe even M2. These are chips that are aimed at the pro level user. So the power user, not somebody that's just looking to surf on the internet and reply to some emails and do really basic tasks on a laptop. This is for video editors. This is for coders. This is for people running multiple things. Could be even potentially for gamers as well, although there's probably better applications, better graphics for those types of users, but this is a big deal. And these are going to be the chips that they put in the Mac Mini, that they put in the new iMacs, that they put in a bunch of different products, maybe even potentially in another iPad Pro, and just make their products even more competitive and, in my opinion, far exceed anything else that you're going to get in the market. I will be buying one of these as soon as I possibly can, and I'll probably be getting the most expensive one, because if I can shave just a couple minutes, 5-10 minutes even, off of my video editing and the mixing down of these videos, just saving that time is worth so much money to me. And so I will absolutely be a user, and I might let you know how I think of the product. But highly anticipated. Moving on to Amazon, started the week at $3,274. Ended much higher. Okay, this thing went up to $3,400. I'll talk on the technical segment where I think this one's headed, and a couple of these other stocks. I think it's clear as day. Just like we've pretty accurately predicted that Tesla was going to walk its way up to $900 per share. It's very close to that. I think over the next week or so, there's a couple of these stocks that are just going to walk higher. They're just going to go higher, and then we'll see what happens during earnings season. Now, holiday shopping season is kicking off early. I'm seeing anecdotal reports of this. My wife always shops early, but a lot of people are getting their shopping done early. And so we'll see maybe some early results when we look at Amazon's earnings here in about 2 weeks. But they're going to try to clear this up. So there's a port of Los Angeles, which is south of me. There's also a port in Long Beach. There's also a port over in San Francisco. They're going to start working these 24/7, which around the world, they've been running ports 24/7 for like decades. Okay. Here in the United States, we're just getting around to it. I think it's a good idea. If they have the labor, if they have the people that can be there, and it can be done safely as well, this is a great idea. We can start clearing these ports out. And in my opinion, you start clearing this ports out, what's going to happen to prices? They're going to come back down. That is my opinion. I am an e-commerce retailer. It is very hard to get things. I have been jacking prices up over the last couple of years, but guess what happens when all this stuff gets into distributors or gets into my warehouse or whatever? Well, guess what? I'm going to have to drop the price. I'm not going to want to sit on this stuff for very long. And so I think you're going to see eventually prices start to come down, but these ports have got to clear first. And estimates are we've got 6 to 8 months before we start seeing any of that. So it will likely be a holiday season where consumers are going to have to pay more, and they're probably going to have some sacrifices on the types of gifts that they're going to be able to give. Now, another way you can clear the ports is not have President Joe Biden signed a directive to make it go 24/7, not ship everything by boat, which is slow and expensive, especially because you need a container ship in each one. Well, guess what? The private sector has solutions, and Amazon is stepping up because they're seeing the problems and they're like, well, we could have a problem. We could have a way of solving this. We are in the market for long-range cargo jets. So these are big, gigantic cargo jets where you can load a bunch of stuff on it. Okay, not necessarily people, but pallets of goods. Well, they're going to pick it up directly from places like China and then fly it back here to the United States. Now, typically most things come by boat. Occasionally, airship works when the profit margins are big enough, but if Amazon's in that business, they'll likely drive those prices down. And that is a good idea, in my opinion. And look, this is probably the most exciting business for Amazon, in my opinion, okay, is the logistics. Because FedEx is over capacity. UPS, USPS is darn near like bankrupt because they're so bogged down with capacity. Well, this is a great way. This is a great way to make money, and it is a business that it absolutely needs Amazon, and Amazon is likely to take lots and lots of that business. Moving on to NVIDIA, started the week at 208, ended up nicely, 218, nice. We'll talk about that from a technical perspective here in a second. Now, this is some disappointing news. Talked about this a little bit, that the EU was looking into the $54 billion ARM acquisition, and they were going to come back with a decision. Well, they haven't come back with the decision yet. They have till October 27th to do that, but the rumors are that they are going to launch a full investigation into this, and that is going to take another 4 months to complete. And so we're going to have to wait for the EU to do their investigation, wait 4 months, and then they'll likely come back to NVIDIA and maybe scrap the deal altogether, but they might ask for concessions or money or something, and it's just kind of a mess. And so you're going to have to wait on that ARM acquisition over at NVIDIA. Moving on to Google, started the week at 2,790, regained a little bit, actually did what we thought it might do, actually back tested that trend line. We'll talk about that here in a second. End of the week at $2,827. Not a lot of news. As you'd expect, again, these companies are coming up into earnings. We start to see a little bit of a quiet period in terms of news, and so we didn't have a lot out of Google. Microsoft also looking bullish from a technical perspective, and we'll see what happens next week. Could be very bullish. End of the week at 304, started the week at 294. Now, unfortunately, the Army has delayed Microsoft's $22 billion AR goggles project. This was a $22 billion or $21.9 billion to be exact over a 10-year period, which is like $2 billion a year. Quite frankly, a rounding error when it comes to Microsoft, but these are things that can develop and maybe become even a bigger contract down the road if that technology works. They're going to likely use this technology, but they need to build it in and integrate it and kind of test it probably a little bit more before they start forking over money to Microsoft. Now, Microsoft unfortunately shutters LinkedIn in China. This was the last American social network. Twitter's gone. Facebook's gone. Google pretty much gone. And all the social networks that are popular here in the United States, including LinkedIn, are now out of China just because of regulation and that type. And look, here in the United States, we do things one way. China, they have every right to do things differently. Can we disagree with it here in the United States? Sure. Could we say, hey, we'd rather them do it differently? Sure. But look, it's its own country and there's not much we can do. And unfortunately, if you're in that country, you got to play by its rules, and we don't necessarily have to agree with it here in the United States, but it is what it is. Moving on to Tesla, some big news out of Tesla this week. Started the week at $795, and it is inching its way up to $900. I've been saying for 3-4 weeks now, this thing's going to 900, and people say in the comments, how can you be so sure about that? You just look at it from a technical perspective, okay? Everybody's looking at when we look at these graphs from a technical perspective, it's not just you and I looking at it, it's everybody. I mean, we're talking about everybody in the stock market looks at this stuff And a lot of people will look at it the exact same way. I'm not unique in what I'm telling you here. I'm just kind of reinforcing it, and I'm telling you what I think everybody else is looking at, and the probabilities of it going to 900 look pretty high, and obviously we're very close to that. The battle over electric vehicle tax incentives heat up. There's 100 House lawmakers. So this bill is tied up into there's like 2 or 3, one of these big, gigantic, like multi-trillion-dollar spending packages that are working its way. Some are in the Senate, some are in the House. I don't really know, but I just know that it is very contentious because you have to have a little bit of cooperation potentially between Republicans and Democrats. And even inside the Democratic Party, you have disagreements as well. And one of those disagreements is this $4,500 tax incentive for buying an electric car if it's union built. So that is Ford, that is GM. Non-unionized here in the United States is Tesla, Toyota, Volkswagen, Nissan, and Honda. They employ non-union workers. So this tax incentive would be a direct handout to the Fords and GMs of the world. Now, one thing that this does phase out are the tax credits after an automaker hits 200,000 vehicles sold. So in Tesla's case, they have sold way more than 200,000 vehicles, and so those tax credits start to phase out a little bit. This law would actually phase this out and actually keep an advantage that Tesla has over other automakers. Now, Tesla sold over 56,000 China-made vehicles. They exported about 3,800 of those vehicles out of the Shanghai factory. I do believe that Berlin factory just pushed off its first vehicle this week as well. And so you might see a little bit less of an export, but there's enough demand in China for Tesla, I think, to make that up. Now, moving on to the technical segment of the program, kicking off with Facebook here. This is pulled down into a lower range here. We're between 330 and 315 on this one. In my opinion, this will likely be earnings driven. I don't necessarily think anybody wants to step in on this one before we see a lot of earnings. That might not be the case when we look at like a Microsoft and maybe even like a Google as well. But I think if you have stones of steel and you like gambling a little bit, and I hate to use the word gambling, but you are kind of, tossing coins at this point because a bad report, and we're coming back down to this $300 level. I'm almost dead certain of that. If you get a bad guidance, bad, Mark Zuckerberg quote or two on the conference call, this thing will break this level at 315 and come down to 300. I'm still not 100% that we won't give back this entire leg of growth. We still have lower lows here, although we closed a little bit higher here. We're still trending down on Facebook, but we are starting to flatten out, and that's not necessarily a bad thing with Facebook. Wouldn't necessarily want to step in on that one. Now, Apple paints a little bit different story. We're literally right here at $144, $145 per share. That is an area of resistance on the way up, an area of support on the way down. We're actually above it. We're now in this upper range, which we were at for many, many weeks. We're between 145 and 150. I mean, this stock really hasn't wavered too much. It's between 138 and 150 since, basically the summertime on this one. And it's chopped around a little bit, and it's peaked as high as 157. But in my opinion, this is probably in a little bit of a holding pattern until we see Monday. We'll see the products that they release. They've been widely kind of reported on and rumored on. And if Apple kind of goes over and above the rumors, there's upside potential. You will see resistance when this stock gets up to 150, okay? But if you break 150, it's breakout alert, and you're probably coming to the 155, 156. You break above 156 on this one, and it's extraordinarily bullish. I mean, 175 could darn near be in play. Now, on the bearish side, we get bearish notes. People aren't excited about the MacBook Pros on Monday, where you're looking for a break below 138. You break below 138, and look, it brings in tons and tons of prices down below. Now, Amazon is probably the one stock if you wanted to play like kind of a weekly move, and that's not really what we do here on the investor channel. We're more like investing, but if you want to like trade and stuff, well, this one's at 34. and I think it's going to walk up here to 35. Okay, that's where it's trending. That's where it wants to walk up to. It's going to want to walk up here to 35 and probably hang out there for a second. This is just me kind of predicting what might happen, but I think we walk all the way up here to 35, and then we stall out until Amazon reports their earnings, and then their earnings and their guidance will be everything with Amazon, and we'll see if it's able to push forward and push higher after earnings. NVIDIA looks amazing, okay? We've got a low here, higher low, higher low. We're making higher lows here. We're sitting at 217 on this one. We're in a clear uptrend, but we do have some over resistance at 230. This one also looks like, to me, it wants to walk back up here to 230 and retest that, okay? Wouldn't surprise me if we retest 30. What would surprise me if we break above 230 and we go higher. The whole market will be trending upwards at that point. I think the higher probability is we come up here to the 230 range, we get rejected, and then we come back down. That's what I think is potentially going to happen with NVIDIA. Now, moving on to Google, I know we got some funky lines on here. Let me zoom this in just a little bit so you guys can see this a little bit, because we did accurately predict this. So we talked about how Google's been in this major up channel, and it finally broke it, and it broke down to the previous lows, or very close lows, of 2,700. And we thought it'd find support here, and I thought it was going to do one of two things. It could break here at 27, and if it certainly did, I think the entire market would have came down with it. But what we thought was going to happen is we were going to come back up here and back test this upper channel. Okay, so we came down here to 27, and then we're all the way back. We're not quite there, but you could probably move this line. You could probably move it down, and we're pretty much on it. Now, next week's very critical with Google. Okay, will we break back up into this channel? That's what these kind of lines represent. Are we going to break back up into this channel? And if we do, it basically means this was just a temporary little fake out. It was just a temporary blip on the radar. We're back up in this channel, and we're probably channeling up at least until earnings. Now, I think the higher probability thing is we actually get rejected here, somewhere up here. Okay, we could go a little higher. We could get up to about $2,900 on this one. That's only about $70 or $80 higher when the stock is, but get rejected here and then come back and retest 2,700. And if you retest 2,700 before earnings, it's a little risky. After earnings, and if they look good, YouTube, everything looks good, well, I think that could be a buying opportunity there. Either way, interesting what we have going on over at Google. Now, moving on to Microsoft, this one's looking good too, okay? And this one's actually doing what we probably thought it would do, but it could break out next week, okay? So we talked about how Microsoft, last week it was down here somewhere. It was down 295, maybe even as low as 285. And I thought, yeah, we would come back up here and hit our head up here on the overhead resistance, which is right here at about $305 per share. Very similar thing to NVIDIA, okay? We're looking for NVIDIA probably to go from about 218 where it's at right now up to 230 and then either stall out there or get rejected. And look, if it breaks higher, that's incredibly bullish. Same thing with Microsoft, okay? If we can break above, and we're even closer to the overhead of resistance on Microsoft. We're basically there. We're like $1 away. If you break higher on Microsoft, extraordinarily bullish, okay? 310, 315, 320s in play. You get rejected here, your buying opportunities on the way back are at 295 and 285. Again, they report earnings very shortly as well. And so you have to keep that in mind. If you want to trade these, just keep in mind earnings is coming, okay? And if any of these companies kind of throw a stinker out there when it comes to earnings, a stinker when it comes to guidance, well, boom, we break some of these resistance levels down here and down they go, okay? And so those are just things that you want to keep in mind. Remember, a trade is a trade. Have a plan, an entry price, an exit price, and a stop loss when you do a trade. When you do an investment where you're doing 20 years, 30 years time horizon, you're just trying to get a relatively decent price and watch your money grow over the years. Now, Tesla's done exactly, and this is some luck, okay? The stock market does its own thing. It doesn't listen to the investor channel, okay? It does its own thing. but there was some skill in calling this way back here. I mean, we were way down here at $700, maybe even at $600 per share, $650 per share. We identified this channel with Tesla and we said, hey, when we got above 720 on this one, incredibly bullish. If we got above 720 on this one, we were coming to 8. We said that here on the show. And sure enough, we came here to 8 and we said, hey, we're here at 8. If we break through 8, we're at the very least, coming to 850, which is about where we're at 840 or so, and potentially all-time highs, 860, 880, potentially all-time highs over $900 per share. Now, we will, I think, likely have some sellers step in on this stock at some point here relatively soon, because that is what's happened on this up channel, okay? As you go up, sellers step in and it bounces on this lower channel. So any pullback to this lower channel, which if it happens next week, will be 820, 815 or so on Tesla. That will be a buying opportunity, in my opinion. You do now have support at 804 on this one. The other thing to keep in mind is I know Tesla reports in 5 days, but we already know how many vehicles they've delivered over the last few months. We know the bulk of those are Model 3 and Model Ys. And so Tesla's earnings are somewhat telegraphed by the fact that they do monthly delivery numbers and monthly shipment numbers out of China as well. That was the FAANG Stock Recap Show. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day. Again, in the links to the description below, I'd love for you to join me on Instagram and Twitter as well. Remember, we've got earnings coming up. We'll have lots of videos here on the channel. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back again soon with more. Good luck with your investments.